My name is Joanna Keller. I'm 64 years old, and for 35 of those years, I taught English literature at the high school down the road in Vermont. I used to tell my students that words, when chosen carefully, could change the course of a life. I never realized how true that lesson would become for me until the day my own family tried to rearrange my life with a single sentence. That morning smelled like cinnamon and baked apples. The kitchen window was open, letting in the thin winter air that always made me feel awake and alive. I had just taken a pie out of the oven when I heard the tires on the gravel drive. My daughter's laughter came first, bright and practiced, followed by the low, confident hum of her husband's voice. Ethan Bishop never entered a room. He occupied it. If you're watching this, stay with me for a moment. What happened that day might sound simple at first, but it carries a lesson I wish every woman my age could remember. Silence can be sharper than anger, and dignity can be the quietest form of strength. They walked in without knocking. Laura set her purse on the counter, already scrolling through her phone, while Ethan scanned the room like he was appraising it. "Smells good," he said, pulling out a chair. "We should do this more often." I smiled, polite, the way teachers do when they know the class is about to test them. We sat at the table. The sunlight fell across the wood in long golden stripes. I poured coffee, the way I always did when I wanted time to think. Ethan folded his hands. "Joanna, we've been thinking," he began, with the tone of someone about to deliver mercy disguised as advice. "This house, it's really too big for you now, isn't it? You don't need such a big house anymore." My hand paused halfway to my cup. The clock behind him ticked, a single clear sound in the still room. He continued, almost cheerfully. "Laura and I talked about it. We could move in, help you with the bills, handle the upkeep. You could settle somewhere comfortable, maybe a nursing home, or a small place closer to town. We'd take care of everything." Laura nodded, not looking at me, her eyes on the cup she wasn't drinking from. "It would be easier for everyone, Mom," she whispered. For a moment, I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. I could hear the faint echo of my late husband's voice, the way he used to laugh whenever he fixed a broken hinge or painted a wall. He had built this house with his own hands. Every nail still held a memory. I set the cup down carefully. "All right," I said softly. Ethan's eyebrows lifted, surprised by how easy it seemed. He smiled, the kind of smile that confuses victory with affection. "That's wonderful, Joanna. We'll make it nice for you. I'll talk to the bank tomorrow." I nodded again, as if agreeing, but inside me, something very old and very still began to wake. I cleared the plates, rinsed them under warm water, and listened to the rhythm of the clock. It was the sound of patience, and patience, I've learned, is the beginning of every quiet storm. They left soon after, full of plans and relief. Their voices trailed out the door, already discussing which furniture they'd keep, which room could be turned into an office. I waited until the sound of their car faded into the distance. The pie sat untouched on the counter, the air still thick with cinnamon. I dried my hands, walked to the living room, and picked up the phone. When Marian answered, her voice was steady as ever. "Joanna, what's going on?" I looked at the sunlight stretching across the floorboards and said, "I think it's time to do something quiet." She paused. "How quiet?" "As quiet as possible," I replied. "And legal." That night, I wrote a short note in my journal. It said only this: "When they believe you're helpless, let them underestimate you. That's when you move the board without making a sound." The next morning, I woke before dawn. I sat by the window, watching the frost melt on the glass, and realized I felt no anger, only clarity. Sometimes peace doesn't come from what we forgive. It comes from what we refuse to surrender. I spent most of that night awake, listening to the creak of the old beams as the wind moved through them. This house had always spoken to me in small ways. The shifting of wood, the hum of the heater, the steady rhythm that felt like a living thing breathing beside me. But that night, it sounded different, as if it knew what I had decided. When the first light touched the curtains, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with an old photo album. The leather cover had softened over the years. I opened it slowly, letting my fingers trace the worn edges of the pages. There we were, Richard and I, younger, laughing in front of the same window where the morning light now spilled. His hands were covered in paint from building the porch railing. Mine were holding the first pie we ever baked together. He used to say, "Joe, this house will hold up as long as we do." He was right. It had carried us through storms and winters, through quiet evenings with books and music, through his illness when I thought silence would swallow me whole. I still remembered his voice the night before he passed, soft but clear. "Promise me something. Never let anyone decide for you what you need." I whispered it aloud, the same way you might whisper a prayer. Never let anyone decide for you what you need. The kettle whistled. I poured a cup, and for a moment, I imagined him sitting across from me, reading the morning paper, shaking his head at the world and smiling at me over the rim of his coffee. I got up and went to the small bookshelf in the living room. Tucked behind a row of novels was an envelope, yellowed and sealed with the careful handwriting I'd never forget. R. Keller, 2012. I hadn't opened it in years. The paper, inside, was thin, his words fading slightly, but still legible. "If you ever feel cornered, don't fight the wall. Find the door. It's always there. You just have to look quietly enough to see it." I folded it back, carefully, and slipped it between the pages of one of my old teaching anthologies. The book was To Kill a Mockingbird. He'd loved that one. I marked the spot with a pressed maple leaf I'd kept from our first fall in this house. As I put the book back, I caught my reflection in the window. The light had turned gold, soft and forgiving. For the first time in a long while, I saw a woman who wasn't defeated, just waiting. I made a list in my head. It was short, just names and steps, nothing dramatic. Marion first. Then a quiet sale, a clean account, no noise, no confrontation, only order, only truth. Before leaving the room, I touched the doorknob, the same brass handle Richard had polished every spring. My palm fit it perfectly, the way it always had. I thought about what Ethan had said, about taking care of things, and I smiled. People like him never understood what ownership really meant. A deed wasn't the proof of it. Memory was. Work was. The scent of wood and tea and history was. I sat down again and wrote a single sentence on the back of the envelope before sliding it into the drawer. "You built it, and I will protect it, with silence, not noise." Outside, the snow had started to fall. Each flake landed without sound, but together they changed the whole landscape. That was how I wanted to move, from quiet act to quiet act, until the world around me looked different. Later that afternoon, I dressed neatly, fixed my hair, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and for a brief second, I felt a flicker of excitement. Not fear, not resentment, just the awareness that something had begun. I walked toward town, each step steady, hearing my husband's voice somewhere behind me, steady as the ticking of that old kitchen clock. "Find the door," he had said. I already had. The next morning, I sat at the table with my tea growing cold and my phone beside it. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I'd been watching the secondhand circle for almost 10 minutes before I finally pressed the call button. Marian picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but alert. "Joanna, you're up early." "I didn't sleep much," I said. "I need your help." Quietly. There was a pause, just long enough for her to understand what kind of help I meant. Marian and I went to college together, back when we both thought the world was built on fairness. Life had shown us otherwise. She had become a lawyer, the kind who listened more than she spoke. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. I told her about Ethan, about the conversation at the table, the words that had hung in the air like smoke. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was another pause, then a low exhale. "All right," she said. "We'll start with control of the property. You own it outright, correct?" "Yes. Richard paid it off before he died. It's in my name." "Good. That gives us leverage. What do you want to do?" I looked out the window at the bare maple trees swaying in the wind. "I want to sell it, privately, before they can touch it." She didn't sound surprised. "I know someone who handles quiet sales. No listings, no noise. His name's Holt. Discreet. We'll use a trust as the transfer entity to keep your name off the initial paperwork. It'll look routine to anyone watching." "How long?" I asked. 5 days if we start now. We'll open an escrow account under the trust's name. You'll sign everything electronically. When the funds clear, the title moves to the buyer instantly. I wrote it down on a notepad, each word, each step, as if I were taking notes for a test I intended to ace. "Marian," I said quietly, "I don't want this to turn into a war." "It won't," she replied. "It'll be a transaction, legal and clean." A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "That's what I want. A transaction. I'll handle the documents. Send me your deed and the last tax record. I'll take care of the rest. Holt will need to inspect, but he'll come alone. You can trust him." After we hung up, I sat still for a moment, my hand resting on the phone. The clock ticked again, each sound like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. I opened my laptop and scanned the folders Richard had once organized. He had labeled everything neatly: insurance, mortgage, utilities, taxes. I found the deed within seconds. His handwriting was on the original scan. Property of Joanna Keller, held in full ownership. I saved the files, attached them to an email, and typed a message to Marian. I reread it twice before pressing send. Subject: deed and records. Message: let's do this quietly. The sound of the email whooshing out felt final. I closed the computer and stood by the window. Outside, the snow had melted into thin ribbons of water that traced the edge of the driveway. A crow perched on the fence, watching me, unbothered. The world looked calm, ordinary, but I could feel something shifting underneath it. A part of me wanted to call Laura, to ask her what she really thought when Ethan spoke for her, but another part knew that silence would speak louder. She would learn soon enough what I had done, and when she did, she might finally see me as I was. Not fragile, not fading, but deliberate. The phone buzzed again. A message from Marian. "Documents received. Holt will contact you tomorrow. Stay steady, Joe." I smiled at the screen, folded the notepad, and slipped it into the drawer beside Richard's old letter. I whispered, "I'm steady." Then I brewed another pot of tea, this time with a sense of purpose. The scent filled the air like a promise. I watched the clock again, each tick a quiet reminder that patience and timing, once again, would be my greatest allies. Ethan came by that afternoon with his usual blend of charm and entitlement, the kind that once fooled me into believing he simply wanted to help. I had left the front door unlocked, as I often did, and he walked in calling my name before I could answer. His footsteps echoed across the hardwood like a metronome, too quick, too sure. "Joanna, thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing," he said, setting his gloves on the counter. "Laura's at work, but I had a few ideas about the place. Maybe we can start some updates. Make it more energy efficient. Modern touches." He spoke like the house already belonged to him. I watched him unpack a roll of blueprints and spread them across my kitchen table. My kitchen table. The paper smelled like new ink and arrogance. "These are just sketches," he went on. "I thought we could knock out this wall, maybe open the living room, add a home office for me upstairs." He pointed to lines and boxes, as though I were his client and not the owner. I leaned against the counter, folding my hands. "That's ambitious," I said evenly. He laughed, not hearing the edge in my tone. "It's practical. You'll love it. We'll get the appraisal up, maybe refinance a bit. The market's great right now. I've already talked to a few contacts at the bank." That sentence landed like a small hammer blow. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, but I said nothing. I watched him fold the papers again, his voice floating in the air like static. When he left to take a phone call, I stepped closer. One corner of the blueprints had smudged graphite notes, numbers, initials, and a half-finished calculation. Beside them, faintly penciled, were the words, "Equity Release, Bishop Holdings." I didn't need Marion to translate that one. It meant he was trying to borrow against my home. From the hallway, I heard him speaking. "Yeah, the house is in play. We'll finalize soon. I can guarantee collateral once the paperwork's through. No, she's fine. Old, but fine. Old, but fine." The phrase pressed against my ribs like something sharp. I turned on the faucet to cover the sound of my footsteps and reached into the drawer by the fridge for my small voice recorder. I'd used it for decades to record classroom notes and book readings. I pressed record and left it on the windowsill. The red light blinked softly, unseen. When Ethan returned, I was stirring a pot on the stove, the picture of calm domesticity. He talked for another 20 minutes, mostly about himself. His failed firm, his ideas, his plans to help Laura's mother transition. I let him talk. Every word was evidence now. He finally stood, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeves. "We'll start drawing up the renovation budget this week," he said. "I'll handle it with the bank." "I trust you'll do what you think is right," I answered, my voice quiet. He smiled, thinking he'd won. "That's all I need to hear." When the door closed behind him, I picked up the recorder and stopped it. The kitchen seemed larger in the silence he left behind. I placed the device in a small tin box under the sink, next to an old recipe card that read, "Apple pie," Richard's favorite. Outside, the light had started to fade. Snow still clung to the edges of the garden, untouched since fall. I could almost see the outline of the blueprints through the table's thin fabric runner. They looked like battle plans someone had drawn on the wrong side of the war. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line. "When people plan over you, plan beneath their noise." Then I tore the page neatly, folded it once, and placed it beside the recorder. The air smelled faintly of smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I breathed it in, slow and steady. Some people shout to claim power. Others whisper and wait. I had waited long enough. 2 mornings later, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes every sound feel deliberate. The creak of a floorboard, the soft hum of the heater, the wind brushing against the window pane. I had spent most of the morning dusting, rearranging, moving through the rooms as though reacquainting myself with an old friend. When I reached Ethan and Laura's guest room, I hesitated. They had started keeping things here in recent months. A few boxes labeled documents, a suit bag, a printer still in its packaging. I'd ignored it before, thinking it harmless. But now, After what I'd heard, I wanted to know what exactly they were keeping under my roof. The top drawer of the desk stuck slightly when I tried to open it. I tugged harder, and something inside shifted. Under a stack of bills and folders, there was a brown envelope marked Power of Attorney Draft. My name was on it. My heart thudded once, sharply. I sat down, smoothing the paper flat on the desk. The document looked professional, but something about the signature line made me frown. My name was there, but it wasn't my hand. The curves were too neat, the loops wrong, the spacing unnatural. Someone had tried to copy me. I took a deep breath and glanced toward the window. The driveway was empty. They wouldn't be back until evening. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and took several photographs, each one close enough to show the ink variations, the faint smudge near the bottom right corner. When I lifted the page, another sheet slid free, a blank notary form, unsigned, but stamped with a fake seal. The texture of the paper was wrong, too thin. Whoever made it thought I wouldn't know the difference. I remembered what Marion had said when we first talked about this. Evidence is power only if you collect it before the noise begins. So I kept going. There was a smaller compartment beneath the drawer, almost invisible if you didn't know to look. Richard had built it himself years ago to store our savings before we trusted banks. I pressed the small groove under the handle, and the false bottom clicked open. Inside, I found an old tin box I hadn't seen in years. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I opened it and found photographs, a few letters, and the original deed to the house. Signed, sealed, notarized, everything authentic. Richard's signature was there, bold and certain, next to mine. I ran my fingers over it slowly, feeling the indentation of his pen strokes. The real one. I placed the fraudulent document beside it for comparison, taking one final photo where both were visible. It felt strange, almost theatrical, this quiet act of self-defense in my own home. But there was no anger, only clarity. The sun had moved across the room, lighting the papers with a soft golden glow. For a moment, the forged page and the real one looked almost identical, except for the faint fingerprint smudge near the top corner of Ethan's version. I smiled faintly. He'd left his own mark, quite literally. I gathered everything carefully, placed the real deed back into the tin, and slipped the fake documents into a folder labeled Garden Plans. No one ever opened that one. Before I closed the desk, I wrote a note to myself on a torn scrap of paper. Trust the drawer that hides what others shouldn't find. I tucked it beside Richard's old letter in my journal. The two pieces of paper together felt like a conversation across time, his voice telling me to find the door, and mine answering that I already had. When I left the room, I took one last look around. The air felt colder here, as if the walls themselves knew what secrets they were holding. I turned off the light, closed the door gently, and locked it behind me. In the hallway, I stopped for a moment, listening. The house had returned to stillness. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock from the kitchen, counting down towards something that would soon be irreversible. I went downstairs and placed my phone on the counter, replaying the photo thumbnails one by one. Each image glowed with quiet certainty, proof of what I already knew. Sometimes, the truth doesn't shout. It waits, neatly folded in a drawer, until you decide to open it. That evening, I walked across the yard to bring Annie a jar of peach preserves. The air had that soft chill that comes before sunset, when the world feels quieter and the light turns kind. Annie lived 2 houses down, in a small white bungalow with wind chimes that always seemed to sing a little out of tune. She was standing by her porch when I arrived, sweeping the steps. "Well, if it isn't my favorite pie lady," she said with a smile. Peach this time, I replied, handing her the jar. Too sweet for one person. She laughed and waved me, inside. Her living room smelled faintly of old books and vanilla candles. A cat slept on the arm of a chair, twitching its tail with the ease of something that trusted the world. We sat down with tea and cookies, and for a while, we talked about nothing important: the weather, the church fundraiser, how the grocery store had switched to self-checkout and confused half the town. But under her warmth, I sensed something else, that familiar ache of someone carrying her own quiet story. She sighed at one point, looking toward the framed photo on her shelf. You know, Henry used to fix everything around here. The faucet, the porch, even the old radio. After he passed, I tried keeping up, but some things just stopped feeling worth fixing. Her words hung there for a moment, soft but heavy. I nodded slowly. It's not the work that's hard, I said. It's the silence afterward. She gave me a look that said she understood exactly what I meant. Do your daughter and her husband visit often? She asked gently. I smiled thinly. Often enough. We both laughed, the kind of laugh that hides the truth but makes it bearable. Then Annie leaned forward, lowering her voice. This might sound strange, but I saw someone at your place a few days ago. Not your family. Some man with a clipboard. He was walking around the yard, measuring things, taking photos. I thought maybe you'd hired someone. I kept my expression calm, though my pulse quickened. No, I said softly. I haven't hired anyone. Her brows furrowed. Well, I just thought you should know. He had a company badge, something with Bishop in it, I think. I figured it was related to your son-in-law. Thank you for telling me, I said, placing my hand over hers. That helps more than you know. Annie squeezed my fingers gently. I didn't mean to pry. I care about you, Joe. People our age, we learn how to disappear politely, don't we? Sometimes I think the world prefers us that way. I felt my throat tighten. Maybe. But disappearing is still a choice, and I haven't made mine yet. She smiled again, though her eyes glistened a little. That's what I like about you. You've still got that spark. Henry used to say I had one too, but it flickers more these days. It's still there, I said. It just burns quieter. We sat together in silence for a while, the sound of the chimes filling the pauses between breaths. Outside, the sky was turning lavender. A car passed down the road, its tires whispering against the wet pavement. Before I left, Annie walked me to the door and handed back the empty teacup. You know, she said, sometimes when people think they're taking something from you, they're actually giving you a reason to start over. Her words landed deep. I nodded, tucking that sentence away like a seed. On the walk home, I looked at my house in the distance, the lights beginning to glow through the windows. It looked peaceful, untouched. But beneath that stillness, I could feel the weight of all that was hidden. The papers in the drawer, the recording under the sink, the plan that was already in motion. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of Annie's chimes down the street. It mixed with the ticking inside my head, a rhythm that matched my steps. By the time I reached the porch, I knew exactly what I had to do next. Sometimes, one kind conversation is enough to remind you why silence isn't surrender. It's preparation. Marian arrived just after noon 2 days later, her car pulling into the driveway with the same precision she brought to everything she did. The sound of her heels on the wooden steps reminded me of our college days, when she used to walk across the campus courtyard with a purpose no one dared interrupt. She stepped into the kitchen and took off her gloves, scanning the room with quick, knowing eyes. Still smells like cinnamon in here, she said with a small smile. I baked this morning, I answered. Old habits. She set her briefcase on the table, flipping open the clasps with a satisfying click. Inside were neatly arranged folders, each labeled in her sharp handwriting. "All right, Joe, here's how we'll do it." I poured her a cup of tea and sat opposite her. "I'm listening." She pulled out a few pages and spread them across the table. "I've already spoken with Holt. He's discreet and fast. We'll list the property under a private trust. No public record of your name until after the sale closes. The escrow account will be under the trust as well. It'll look like a simple transfer between two limited entities. Once the funds are cleared, we'll move them to your new account." I nodded, watching her outline each step with calm authority. "And how long will it take?" 5 business days from now, if all signatures are in by tonight," she said. "Holt has a buyer ready. Young couple, early 30s, cash offer. They've been looking for a place just like this. They move fast and don't ask questions." A quiet laugh escaped me. "You always did attract the efficient ones." Marian grinned. "You taught me that. Never waste time on people who mistake kindness for permission." We went over the paperwork together. Holt joined us later that afternoon, a tall man with a calm, unhurried demeanor, and the kind of presence that made you believe he could walk through a storm without wrinkling his coat. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes kind but sharp. "Mrs. Keller," he said, "I understand this needs to be handled with discretion." "Yes," I replied. "And speed." He nodded. "You'll have both." He reviewed the property details with Marian while I brewed another pot of tea. The conversation between them was all numbers and logistics, but the undercurrent was clear. Everything had to appear ordinary, seamless, legal. When Holt left, Marian stayed behind to finalize the digital signatures. The glow of my laptop screen lit her face as she scrolled through the forms. "Initial here," she said, pointing. "And here, perfect. Now the transfer agreement." I signed each page carefully, my handwriting steady. The small clicks of the mouse and keyboard sounded almost like rain on a window. Soft, rhythmic, purposeful. When it was done, Marian closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "You understand what this means, Joe? Once the sale goes through, they can't touch it. Not a penny. The house will belong to the buyers. The funds will belong to you. Even if Ethan tries something, the paper trail is airtight." I exhaled slowly. "I understand. I'm not angry anymore, Marian. Just done." She reached across the table, her hand resting briefly over mine. "That's the best place to be." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun began to lower, spilling long orange streaks through the windows. The house glowed softly, as if it too understood what was happening, that soon it would belong to someone who deserved it. As Marian packed her papers, I looked around one last time. The books, the framed photographs, the vase Richard had bought at a roadside stand. It all felt lighter, as though it was finally allowed to breathe again. When she stood to leave, Marian paused by the door. "You're doing the right thing, Joe. They'll never see it coming, but this isn't revenge. It's reclamation." "I know," I said quietly, "and it's enough." After she left, I sat alone for a long time, letting the silence fill every corner of the room. I thought about Holt's steady voice, the precision of Marian's hands, the way everything had aligned without noise or confrontation. I picked up the old keyring from the counter, the one Richard had used. The metal felt cold against my palm. I turned it once, just to hear the soft click. It sounded like an ending. In my notebook, I wrote a single line before turning out the light. "Justice can be gentle. You just have to mean it." The following morning began like any other, except that I knew nothing about it was ordinary. The light felt different, sharper somehow, as if it had learned the rhythm of my pulse. I woke before the alarm, brewed coffee, and checked my email. At the top of my inbox was a message from Holt. Sale approved. Closing date confirmed for Friday. Escrow active. It was Tuesday, 5 days until the house no longer belonged to me. Or, perhaps more truthfully, 5 days until it no longer belonged to them. I stared at the words for a long time before whispering, "Good." I spent the morning moving through the house with quiet intention. I packed small things first: the framed photo of Richard by the window, a few books, the tea set I loved. I left the furniture untouched. It felt right that the house would keep some of its memories. When I passed the mirror in the hallway, I almost didn't recognize the expression on my own face. Calm. Certain. Around noon, I heard a car pull up. Laura came in, her tone bright and casual. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. You've been quiet lately." I smiled. "I've had a few things to take care of." She leaned against the counter, watching me place dishes into boxes. "Ethan's been talking to the bank about some renovation options," she said. "He says it'll raise the value once everything's settled." I wiped my hands on a towel. "That's thoughtful of him." "He's doing it for you," she said quickly, as though rehearsing a line. "He wants to make sure you're comfortable." "I'm sure he does." Laura laughed nervously. "You're not upset about any of this, are you?" I shook my head. "No, dear, I understand." Her phone buzzed. She looked down, distracted, scrolling. A moment later, she smiled faintly. "Ethan says the appraisal is almost ready. He's going to send over the details for your signature." "That's fine," I said, my voice steady. "Tell him to email me." When she left, she kissed my cheek distractedly. I waited until her car disappeared down the road before opening my laptop. There it was. An email from Ethan, subject line, "House docs, review before signing." The irony almost made me laugh. Right beneath it, Holt's message waited, marked secure. I clicked his first. He'd attached the finalized sale agreement and escrow confirmation, complete with the buyer's initials. I downloaded the file and saved it in a folder labeled Recipes 2001. Then, with a steady breath, I signed my name in the digital box and pressed submit. The email whooshed away, leaving a quiet hum in the room. I sat still for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest like a heartbeat. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. Another message from Holt. "Documents received. Ownership transfer scheduled for Friday 10 a.m. Funds in process." It was done. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching the wind stir the bare branches outside. Somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing. Life continued, unaware that a quiet revolution had just taken place inside this old house. I began labeling boxes: keep, donate, let go. Each word felt like a small act of freedom. When I reached the bookshelf, I ran my fingers along the spines, stopping at the novel that hid Richard's letter. I left it there. Some things should stay rooted, even when everything else is moving. By evening, the rooms looked softer, lighter. The smell of cardboard mixed with the faint scent of apples from the pie cooling on the counter. I sat at the table, eating a small slice, when my email pinged again. Laura had replied to Holt's earlier correspondence without realizing what it was. She'd seen the subject line, "Final approval for property transfer," and sent me a cheerful message. "Glad you're getting things sorted. Ethan says this will make it easier to handle the paperwork later." I smiled. They had no idea. The sky outside darkened into a violet wash, and the clock ticked its steady rhythm. I thought about what Richard had written all those years ago. Find the door. I had found it. And now, with one signature, I had stepped through. When I went to bed that night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. The house creaked softly around me, not in warning, but but in relief. 2 days later, just as the first snow began to fall again, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was thin, official-looking, stamped from a clinic I'd never visited. The heading read, Comprehensive Cognitive Assessment, Preliminary Findings. My name was printed in bold across the top. The letter claimed I had been evaluated as partially incompetent to manage personal and financial affairs. I sat down slowly, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I hadn't seen a doctor in months, at least not for anything like this. I read the letter twice, then a third time, and felt the slow, cold recognition spread through me. This was their next move. I picked up the phone and called Marian. She answered on the first ring. "Something's wrong," I said quietly. I just received a medical evaluation I never had. There was no surprise in her voice, only precision. "Send me a photo, every page." I took pictures front and back and texted them to her. She was silent for almost a full minute before she spoke again. "Joe, this isn't from your doctor. It's a forged form. The header's real, but the clinic code doesn't match. Someone copied the template." "Ethan," I said simply. "Yes," she replied. "He's trying to establish incapacity. That's the first step before filing for guardianship or financial control. But he slipped up. This form references an outdated code. It hasn't been used in 5 years." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. "Can we prove that?" "Easily. I'm calling Dr. Patel right now. She treated you after Richard passed, remember? She's licensed and credible. She'll issue a verification letter. Then we'll notify the county office and attach her affidavit to the trust file. If they try to use that letter, it will collapse in court." Her words steadied me. I felt my hands stop shaking. "Thank you, Marian." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Just keep everything. Don't destroy a single page. Let me handle the rest." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while, staring at the snowflakes gathering outside the window. They fell in slow spirals, landing softly on the railings, melting as they touched the wood. It reminded me of how lies sometimes arrive, quiet, almost beautiful, until they dissolve under the warmth of truth. An hour later, Marian called back. "I spoke to Dr. Patel. She's sending her statement directly to me. It confirms your mental and physical competence. She's also agreed to verify your signature on file. Ethan forged it poorly." "Poorly enough to notice?" I asked. "Oh, yes. His version loops left. Yours loops right. Amateur work." That made me laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in days. You'd think for an architect he'd have better lines. "Desperation makes people sloppy," she said. "He's cornered, Joe. He must sense the sale's already closing." "Good," I said, looking out at the yard. "Let him feel it." Later that afternoon, I printed Dr. Patel's statement when it arrived by email. Her words were clear and kind. "Patient is of sound mind, capable of managing all affairs independently. Any documents stating otherwise should be disregarded as invalid or fraudulent." I read it twice, each line dissolving another layer of worry. By evening, Marian had filed a report with the county clerk for attempted elder exploitation. She told me to expect a follow-up, but that everything was under control. I trusted her. I always had. That night, I lit a small candle in the kitchen and watched the flame move with the draft from the window. I thought about how often people like Ethan assume that age meant weakness, that kindness meant surrender. They were always wrong. When I finally went to bed, I placed both letters, the false and the true, side by side on my nightstand. They looked like mirror images, one empty, one alive. The truth didn't need to shout. It simply stood there, steady, letting the lie collapse under its own weight. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the dark. You taught me well, Richard. I can handle this. Outside, the wind carried the faintest sound of something shifting. Branches brushing, snow settling, the world quietly correcting itself. The next morning began with the sound of tires crunching over snow. I was rinsing a cup when I saw two patrol cars parked at the end of my driveway. Their lights weren't flashing, but the sight of them still sent a slow ripple through me. A knock followed, polite but firm. I dried my hands, smoothed my sweater, and opened the door. Standing there was Sheriff Tomas Rivera. I hadn't seen him in years, but I recognized the same calm in his eyes. Behind him stood a younger officer holding a manila folder. "Morning, Mrs. Keller," Tomas said gently. "Mind if we come in for a moment?" "Of course not," I replied, stepping aside. "Coffee's fresh." He gave a faint smile, the kind that tried to bridge formality with kindness. "We're here on a request from Mr. Ethan Bishop. He's filed for a wellness and welfare check. Says he's concerned about your safety and mental state." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that right?" He nodded. He also provided a signed warrant to inspect the property, claims there might be financial exploitation by an outside party. His voice made clear he didn't believe a word of it. "May I see the warrant?" I asked. He handed me the papers. The seal was genuine, but the language was strange. Sloppy, even. It listed an address that was half wrong and included an outdated section of statute. Marion's voice echoed in my mind. Desperation makes people sloppy. I read the first few lines carefully, then handed it back. "You're welcome to look around," I said. "Nothing here but books and tea." Tomas gave a subtle nod to his deputy, who began a slow, respectful walkthrough. He didn't open drawers or touch anything, just looked. The house was spotless, every box labeled, every document exactly where it should be. As they moved through the living room, Tomas lingered by the table where I'd left the 2 letters from the night before. His eyes fell on them, then lifted back to mine. "That's quite a coincidence," he said quietly. "Same clinic listed on the complaint, but different handwriting." "I don't believe in coincidences," I said. He gave a small nod. "Neither do I." The younger officer returned after a few minutes. "Nothing unusual, sir." Tomas closed the folder, slipping it under his arm. "All right then. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Keller. Sorry for the intrusion." "Not at all," I said. "Would you like that coffee after all?" He hesitated, then smiled. "You always did make it strong." We sat at the table like old friends. He took a slow sip, watching the snow drift outside the window. "You know, Richard once told me to keep an eye on you. Said you had more courage than most people he knew." I felt a small warmth rise in my chest. "He said that, did he?" "He did. And for what it's worth, I think he was right." We talked for a while, about the town, the changes, the people who had moved away. But beneath the small talk was an unspoken understanding. He knew what Ethan was trying to do, and I knew he wouldn't let it stand. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "For official record," he said, "I found no evidence of neglect, exploitation, or mental incapacity. You're competent, lucid, and organized. I'll be filing that report today." "Thank you, Tomas." He adjusted his hat and gave me a knowing look. "Take care of yourself, Joe, and don't worry. Some things have a way of circling back." I watched the patrol cars roll down the driveway until the sound faded into the wind. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the tension melt from my shoulders. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cedar, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang, a rare sound in winter, but a welcome one. I stood there, letting the quiet return, steady and sure. It was strange how peace could follow chaos so quickly, how justice sometimes arrived in uniform but spoke in the same tone as friendship. I looked at the letters still lying on the table and smiled. For the first time in a long while, I felt protected, not because someone stood guard, but because the truth finally did. The next day was bright and cold, the kind of morning where the sky looked too clean to trust. I had just finished a call with Marion confirming that the escrow transfer was complete when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Annie. Her voice trembled on the line. "Joanna, there are people at your house," she said. "A moving truck just pulled up. 2 men are carrying boxes out of your living room. One of them looks like Ethan." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, keys, and phone and drove home faster than I had in years. The truck was already half full when I turned into the driveway. The side of it read, "Bishop & Sons Home Solutions." The irony nearly made me laugh. Ethan stood near the porch, giving orders to the movers as if he were conducting an orchestra. He looked startled when he saw my car pull up, but he quickly put on his usual mask of confidence. "Joanna," he called out. "Hey, don't worry. We're just helping you declutter. Laura said you'd appreciate the head start." I stepped out of the car, my hands steady despite the cold. "I didn't ask for your help." He smiled, that same polite, patronizing smile he used whenever he thought he had control. "We're just trying to make the transition easier. You shouldn't have to worry about heavy lifting. You'll thank us when you're settled somewhere comfortable." The movers hesitated, glancing between us. One of them held a box marked "Kitchen, Fragile." "Put that down," I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to stop them mid-step. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we were told—" "I own this house," I interrupted, my tone firm but calm. "You were misinformed. I suggest you stop before this becomes your problem too." Ethan took a step forward, his expression tightening. "Joanna, please. You're not thinking clearly. We're all on the same side here." I met his gaze. "No, Ethan. You stopped being on my side the moment you forged my name." He froze. "Sheriff Rivera already filed his report," I continued. "Dr. Patel confirmed my competence, and as of this morning, this house isn't even mine to argue over." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, opened Holt's email, and handed it to him. "The sale closed at 10 this morning. The deed is transferred, the funds are secured, and I'm under no obligation to explain anything to you." He stared at the screen, his face pale. "You sold it?" "Yes," I said softly, quietly, legally, completely." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of the movers shuffling uncomfortably. Annie appeared at the edge of the driveway, her phone in hand, recording. "I thought you might need a witness," she said. Ethan turned toward her, his voice sharp. "You can't film this." "I can," she replied calmly. "You're trespassing." I took a small step forward, holding my ground. "Ethan, if you touch anything else in this house, I'll have Tomas back here in 5 minutes. And this time, it won't be for a wellness check." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight drained from him. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then opened again. "You blindsided us," he muttered. I nodded. "No, I just stopped warning you." The movers began putting the boxes back inside. The noise of tape being peeled and footsteps crossing the porch filled the silence. When they were done, Ethan stood there, defeated, staring at the house as though seeing it for the first time. "I was only trying to help," he said finally. "Help doesn't come with signatures you forge," I answered. "It comes with respect you give freely." He had no reply. After a long moment, he turned, gestured for the movers, and walked toward the truck. The engine roared to life, the gears grinding against the snow. I stood there watching them drive away until the sound faded into nothing. Annie lowered her phone and came closer. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice shook a little. "Just tired." She smiled gently. "You did what most people only dream of doing." I looked back at the porch, at the open door that let in a sharp gust of cold air. "I didn't dream of it," I said. "I just refused to let it become a nightmare." She squeezed my shoulder before leaving, her footsteps fading into the quiet. I went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, breathing in the stillness that filled the house once more. It was strange how justice could sound so peaceful, just the echo of an engine fading and the click of a lock turning for the last time. The morning after the moving truck incident, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the house itself had exhaled. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders, receipts, and stacks of paper that had once been part of a life I thought would never need defending. Now, each document felt like armor. Marian called just after 8. "Joe, we're almost there," she said, her voice brisk but kind. Holt confirmed the payment cleared. "I'm filing the notice of sale and trust closure today. But we still need to make sure every loose end is sealed." "I've been working on that since dawn," I said, tapping the pile beside me. "Invoices, property taxes, loan statements, everything labeled and scanned." "That's my girl," she said with a small laugh. "Send me copies." Holt mentioned Ethan might have submitted an application for a home equity loan before the sale. "We need proof he acted without your consent." I opened my laptop and started attaching files. The quiet hum of the computer mixed with the soft ticking of the clock, the rhythm that had carried me through these past weeks. I found the document in question within minutes. An online application dated 2 weeks earlier, listing Ethan as financial proxy for homeowner Joanna Keller. My name was there, typed but not signed. "Found it," I said. "Unapproved loan request. Digital trace shows his email." Marian's tone sharpened. "Perfect. Forward it to me and copy Tomas. This will go straight into the record for attempted fraud. He's finished, Joe." I sent the email and leaned back, exhaling. "You sound almost disappointed." She chuckled softly. "Disappointed that he thought you were easy. He should have known better." While we spoke, I organized everything into neat boxes: bank statements, mortgage history, household bills. I printed duplicates of each set and sealed them in envelopes marked Evidence A through E. The process was almost soothing, like grading essays again, ensuring every comma was where it belonged. Around noon, Holt stopped by to collect the signed documents. He looked as calm as ever, his winter coat still dusted with snow. "Everything's filed," he said. "Funds are secure, and the new owners have wired the balance. Congratulations, Mrs. Keller." I smiled faintly. "Congratulations seem like the wrong word." He returned the smile. "Maybe, but you've earned it. Not everyone manages to stay this composed while protecting everything they've built." When he left, I stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the road. A light snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow, the kind that erases footprints but never memories. A little later, my phone buzzed. An email from Marian. The subject line read, "He's been flagged." I opened it to see a scanned report from the bank's fraud department. Ethan's forged loan application had triggered a legal alert. The account he'd tried to access was frozen, pending investigation. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, just stillness. I forwarded the email to Tomas with a short note. "For your records. Thank you." His reply came within minutes. "Consider them filed. Stay safe, Joe." By afternoon, the kitchen table looked almost bare again. I stacked the last folder, tied it neatly with a ribbon, and placed it in a box marked, "Keep for peace of mind." It was Richard's old habit, labeling boxes not for storage, but for meaning. When the last of the light faded through the window, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the fire. I thought about everything that had happened. How easily a life could be stolen if you weren't watching. How quietly it could be reclaimed if you were patient enough. The sound of paper rustling in the box beside me was oddly comforting. Proof of truth never needed to shout. It only needed to exist. I took one last sip of tea, closed my eyes, and let the warmth settle in my chest. The hard part was nearly over. All that remained was to watch the truth finish its quiet work. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the kind of scent that always reminded me of the start of the school year. Fresh, nervous, expectant. I arrived early, dressed simply in a navy coat and gloves that Richard once bought me for Christmas. Marian was already waiting inside, a stack of files in her hands, her hair pinned neatly as always. "You ready?" she asked, her voice steady. I nodded. More than ready. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Rows of wooden benches, a single flag, and the slow hum of the heating vents filled the quiet. Ethan sat at the far table, his posture stiff but outwardly confident. Laura was beside him, her face pale, her hands clasped too tightly. She wouldn't look at me. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He was an older man with clear eyes that seemed to see through excuses before they were spoken. He adjusted his glasses and said, "We're here to address Mr. Bishop's emergency motion regarding the property of Mrs. Joanna Keller." Marian rose gracefully. "Your Honor, before this motion proceeds, I'd like to submit evidence indicating a fraudulent medical evaluation, a forged financial document, and a false representation of ownership intent." Ethan's attorney, a younger man in a dark suit, shifted uncomfortably. "Objection, Your Honor. These documents haven't been verified." Marian smiled faintly, the way she used to when someone tried to debate her in college. "They have. By the bank's fraud division, by Dr. Patel, and by Sheriff Rivera. All sworn statements are included in Exhibit A." She handed the binder to the clerk. The sound of the pages sliding open echoed softly across the room. The judge leafed through the papers, his brow furrowing slightly as he read. Ethan leaned toward his attorney, whispering something, but the man only shook his head. When Marian spoke again, her tone was quiet but unyielding. "Your Honor, my client acted within full legal rights to sell her property through a private trust. The funds are secured, the deed is lawfully transferred, and any attempt to invalidate this sale constitutes interference and potential elder exploitation under state statute." The judge nodded slowly, tapping his pen against the bench. "And the evidence supporting your client's competence?" Marian lifted a second folder. "Dr. Patel's affidavit, Your Honor, filed yesterday. It confirms Mrs. Keller's sound mind and complete autonomy." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Keller, would you stand, please?" I rose, smoothing my coat. "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand the nature of these proceedings?" "I do," I said. "And I understand the nature of what was taken from me long before this case. My peace of mind. I'm simply here to take it back." He regarded me for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." He turned his gaze to Ethan. "Mr. Bishop, I've reviewed the signatures on the financial application you submitted. The forensic report confirms they were forged. Do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" Ethan's face reddened. "It was a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I was trying to protect my wife's mother from making bad decisions. I only wanted what was best for her." The judge's voice was calm, but the weight of it filled the room. Protection doesn't come through deceit, Mr. Bishop. It comes through respect. Your motion is denied, effective immediately. Furthermore, this court recommends that a formal investigation into financial misconduct proceed. A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Laura pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening with realization. For the first time, she looked at me, not as her mother, not as her obstacle, but as someone she'd wronged. When the gavel came down, the sound was final, like the closing of a heavy door. Outside the courtroom, Marion turned to me with a soft smile. "It's done, Joe, completely." I nodded. "Thank you." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did this. You stayed calm. You let the truth do the talking." I looked out the window at the falling snow. "It's strange," I said. "I thought victory would feel louder." Marion's smile deepened. "That's because this isn't victory. It's peace." We walked down the steps together, the sound of our boots crunching against the ice. Across the street, I saw Laura standing near their car, her eyes searching mine. I gave her a small nod, nothing forgiving, not yet, but not angry either, just acknowledgement. She nodded back, tears bright in her eyes. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The courthouse clock struck noon, the sound rolling across the empty parking lot like a bell marking the end of a long lesson. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, not because someone had been punished, but because the truth had finally been heard. The day after court, the house was quiet in a different way. Not tense, not watchful, just still, as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I made myself tea and stood in the doorway of each room, saying a kind of silent goodbye. Every space held something of me. The faint smell of chalk from my teaching days, the grooves in the stair rail where Richard's hand once rested, the faint scrape on the floor from when we moved in the old bookshelf. The new owners were due to arrive in 2 days. There wasn't much left to pack, just the small things that carried meaning but not weight. I opened the top drawer of the writing desk, the same one where I'd once found Ethan's forgery. Now it was nearly empty except for a small stack of envelopes and a worn paperback wedged in the corner. The book's spine was cracked, its cover faded. To Kill a Mockingbird. I lifted it out carefully. As I did, a folded piece of paper slid from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. My heart recognized it before my eyes did. The letter. I sat down and unfolded it, the paper soft from years of being touched. Richard's handwriting was still firm, though the ink had faded slightly. "Joe," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to remind you of what you already know. You've always been stronger than you think. The world will test that strength in quiet ways. When people mistake your kindness for surrender, your silence for weakness. When that happens, remember this: you don't have to fight to prove your power. You only have to stand still and know what's yours." I pressed my hand over the words, letting them sink in. The room felt warmer somehow, as though he'd walked in and said them himself. If one day they forget what you've given, remind them quietly, by taking back your name. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I laughed softly through it, shaking my head. "You always knew," I whispered. I folded the letter again, more carefully this time, and placed it back in the book. Then I packed both inside a small wooden box with a few photos, my wedding ring, and the keys to the old shed out back. That was all I would take. Everything else, the furniture, the curtains, even the smell of cinnamon that lived in the walls, would stay. By late afternoon, the house was almost empty. I walked from room to room, checking each window latch, each light switch, each drawer. The echoes of my footsteps sounded softer than I remembered. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt ready. I stopped in the living room, where the last rays of daylight slanted through the window. The dust in the air looked like tiny sparks floating between past and future. I stood there until the light began to fade. For years, I had carried the idea that letting go was a kind of loss. Now, standing in that golden half-light, I understood it differently. Letting go wasn't losing. It was releasing the weight someone else had tried to place on me. I closed the last box, sealed it with a strip of tape, and wrote one word on the side: freedom. As I set it by the door, I looked around one final time. The kitchen, the staircase, the faint outline on the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. They were all part of the same quiet truth. I had protected what mattered. I had done it without shouting, without rage, without breaking. When I turned off the lights, the darkness felt kind, not lonely. I whispered into it, "Thank you, Richard. I kept my promise." Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was pale and clear. I locked the door behind me, slipped the keys into my coat pocket, and walked down the porch steps with the smallest, most certain smile. The morning of the handover arrived crisp and cold, sunlight glinting off the thin layer of frost that had settled overnight. I woke early, unable to sleep, and brewed coffee one last time in that kitchen. The smell filled the air like a memory refusing to fade. I took my mug to the window, watching as the driveway slowly brightened with light. Today, the house would no longer be mine, and somehow, that felt exactly right. At 10 sharp, Holt's car pulled up, followed by another. A young couple stepped out, bundled in coats, their faces bright with the kind of hope that only comes with beginnings. Holt greeted them warmly, then waved for me to join them. "Mrs. Keller," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Meet Daniel and Grace. They're the new owners." The woman smiled shyly. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes scanning the porch, the old oak tree, the snow catching on the fence. "You can feel the history here." I returned her smile. "It's been good to me. I hope it will be good to you." She nodded. "We'll take care of it." Holt handed me a small envelope, the official closing confirmation, neat and final. He then passed a new set of brass keys to the couple. "All yours," he said. As the papers changed hands, a car door slammed behind us. I turned to see Ethan striding up the driveway, his face tight with confusion. He was holding his old house keys in one gloved hand. "Joanna, what is this?" he demanded. "You can't just— What are you doing?" I said nothing, just watched as he marched up the steps and shoved his key into the lock. He twisted it once, twice. Nothing. The lock didn't budge. He tried again, harder this time, the metal scraping uselessly. His voice broke the silence. "You changed the locks?" I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing. "No, Ethan. I changed the ownership." He turned toward me, disbelief flashing across his face. "You sold it? Without telling us?" "I told you," I said calmly. "Just not in words you were listening to." He stared at the new owners, then at Holt, as if searching for someone to contradict me. Holt met his gaze evenly. "Everything's legal and complete, Mr. Bishop. I suggest you respect Mrs. Keller's privacy from here on." For a moment, no one moved. The air hung between us, still and heavy. Then Ethan's shoulders sagged. He looked down at the useless keys in his palm, turning them over like they were foreign objects. The sound of them clinking together was small, but final. "I thought you trusted me," he said quietly. "I did," I replied, and then I learned the difference between trust and surrender. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. He slipped the keys into his pocket and walked back toward his car, his steps crunching over the frost. Laura sat waiting in the passenger seat, her head turned away from the window. When he reached her, he didn't say a word. The car started, reversed, and disappeared down the road. For a while, none of us spoke. Holt handed me a folder with the final receipts. "It's done," he said softly. I nodded, feeling an odd mix of relief and calm. "Thank you, Holt, for handling it quietly." He smiled. "You handled it better than anyone I've ever worked with." The young couple thanked me once more before heading inside. I watched them step into the house, their house now, and somehow it made me smile. They were careful with the floors, gentle with the doors, already treating the space with respect. It was a good sign. I turned toward my car and paused, glancing back one last time. The house stood steady and bright in the sunlight, proud but peaceful. As I reached for my door, I caught sight of Ethan's keys still lying on the porch railing where I'd set my cup. I picked them up, the metal cold against my skin. I turned one between my fingers and whispered to the empty air, "You were right, Richard. The door was always there." I slipped the old keys into my coat pocket, their weight light but significant, and walked to my car. The day stretched open before me, quiet, clear, full of possibility. When I started the engine, I didn't look back. The sound of the lock clicking shut behind me was the softest victory I'd ever known. 2 days after the handover, I was sitting in my small apartment overlooking the lake, the morning light shimmering across the water like a promise. The boxes were still stacked neatly by the wall, untouched. I hadn't yet decided where anything should go. It felt good not to rush. My laptop rested on the kitchen counter, open to my bank's home screen, a small reminder that peace can coexist with vigilance. Then, at 9:14 a.m., the first alert appeared. Unrecognized sign-in attempt detected. The message blinked at the top of my email. Another followed seconds later. Password reset request initiated from an unfamiliar device. I froze. Marion's voice seemed to echo in my head. "If he can't control you, he'll try to control what's left of you." I called her immediately. "He's trying something digital," I said. She didn't sound surprised. "Stay calm. Don't open anything. I'll call the bank's security desk and trace it. Give me 10 minutes. I watched the cursor blink on my screen, a heartbeat of its own. 10 minutes felt longer than the whole trial. I paced, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the sound of my own breathing. Then my phone rang again. "It's confirmed," Marion said. "He's using your old laptop credentials. The system flagged 3 failed access attempts. Tomas is on his way to the station now. He's pulling the digital trace through the bank's fraud team. We'll have a warrant by the afternoon." I sat down slowly. He still thinks I'm something he can log into and manage. Marion exhaled softly. "That's what people like him never understand. They don't want people. They want access. But this time, the system's working in your favor." An hour later, Tomas called. His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the quiet satisfaction beneath it. "Joe, we've got him. The trace leads straight to Ethan's home IP. He used falsified documents with your signature to verify identity. Bank security flagged the mismatch and froze the account. We're filing for a search of his devices this afternoon." I stared at the lake through the window, the surface rippling with wind. "He won't stop until something makes him," I said quietly. "This will," Tomas replied. "Once we seize his computer, it's over. There's enough there for a fraud investigation." By evening, Marion texted me a short update. "Warrant executed. Devices in custody. He's being questioned. You're in the clear." I set my phone down and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Outside, the sun had slipped low, turning the lake to glass. I walked onto the small balcony and wrapped my sweater tighter against the wind. Across the water, the lights of town flickered on, one by one. Each tiny glow looked like proof that the world keeps turning even when someone tries to darken your corner of it. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of wine, the first in months. The taste was sharp and clean. I turned on the radio, a quiet instrumental station, and sat by the window. For a long time, I just listened to the steady hum of life returning to normal. The sound of a passing car, a bird on the balcony rail, the faint click of my phone buzzing once more. It was Marion again. "It's done, Joe. He's under investigation for fraud and digital impersonation. You won." I typed back, "No, I just stopped losing." That night, I opened my journal for the first time since the sale and wrote, "Control is never stolen in a single act. It's surrendered, inch by inch, until you decide to take it back." Then I closed the book, turned off the lights, and stood by the window, watching my reflection fade into the dark. The world outside was quiet, unbothered, infinite. I smiled to myself, the smallest, most private smile. Peace didn't feel like triumph. It felt like breathing. It was a Thursday morning when Tomas called again. His voice carried that familiar calm, but underneath it I heard something else, a hint of disbelief mixed with resignation. "Joe," he said, "you won't believe this. Ethan just filed a police complaint against you." I almost laughed. "For what now?" He sighed. "He claims you stole property from him during the move. Furniture, electronics, even some household tools. Says you took them when you left the house." I sat down at the table, coffee steaming beside me. So now I'm a thief in his story. Tomas chuckled softly. "Don't worry. We already know the pattern. Still, we'll need you to come down and give a statement. Bring your receipts and the moving inventory from Holt." I agreed, hung up, and went to my files. The folder was exactly where it always was, labeled neatly, "Final Sale, Receipts." I'd kept copies of every transaction, every digital transfer, every piece of evidence Marion said might one day matter. I never imagined I'd actually need them again, but I wasn't surprised either. People like Ethan didn't stop until the world forced them to. An hour later, I walked into the sheriff's office. The building was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Thomas greeted me at the door. "You sure you want to do this in person?" "Yes," I said. "If he's going to accuse me, he can hear the truth from my voice." He smiled. "That's the spirit." Inside the small conference room, Ethan sat at the far end of the table, arms folded, eyes bloodshot. He didn't look at me. A young officer stood beside him with a clipboard. Tomas nodded toward me. "Mrs. Keller, this is just a formality. Please describe what you removed from the property at the time of sale." I opened my folder and handed him the inventory. 4 boxes of personal items, 1 box of books, 1 of photos, and a few kitchen tools. Everything else was included in the sale. Here are the signed transfer receipts, notarized by Holt's office. The officer took them, flipping through the pages. "These all match the closing documents," he said. "Every item accounted for." Ethan shifted in his chair. "She's lying. She must have taken—" Tomas raised a hand, his tone firm but even. "Mr. Bishop, please. You've made serious claims without evidence. The receipts are clear. The sale is legitimate. And your previous digital record shows unauthorized access attempts to Mrs. Keller's accounts." Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. His anger seemed to collapse into itself, leaving only exhaustion. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with something closer to pity. "Ethan, you could have had peace. You just kept trying to own what was never yours. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said quietly. It just makes me free. Tomas stood, closing the file. This complaint is officially dismissed as false reporting. Mr. Bishop, I strongly advise you to stop any further contact with Mrs. Keller. Continued harassment will result in charges. Ethan's chair scraped the floor as he stood abruptly. He hesitated, then left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Tomas turned to me. That's the last of it, Joe. The file's closed. I exhaled slowly. I'm not sure I ever believed it would end. He smiled kindly. It ends when you stop letting him write the story. Outside, the air smelled of rain. I walked to my car and sat for a moment, watching the droplets gather on the windshield. Somewhere behind me, I imagined Ethan standing alone, clutching those useless keys, realizing they no longer fit anywhere. I started the engine, the sound low and steady, and whispered to myself, freedom doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like leaving without looking back. As I pulled onto the road, the rain grew heavier, washing everything clean. The first morning in my new apartment began with quiet sunlight spilling through the thin white curtains. The air smelled faintly of lake mist and roasted coffee from the cafe downstairs. It was the kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. No tension humming beneath the walls. No footsteps I didn't trust. No shadows of arguments waiting to happen. Just peace, raw and real. I walked barefoot across the small living room, my coffee mug warm in my hands. The window faced the lake, its surface smooth and silver under the pale morning sky. Ducks floated near the dock, and somewhere, someone was playing soft guitar through an open window. The world was awake, but gently. On the kitchen counter sat a neat stack of unopened boxes. I'd labeled them carefully. Books, letters, kitchen, keep, not important, but loved. I smiled at the last one. Richard would have teased me for it, but I liked the honesty of it. Some things didn't have to make sense. They just had to stay. I turned on the small radio by the sink. A woman's voice was reading the local news. Something about a new park project, a community art fair, a fraud investigation in the county. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I already knew how that story ended. The phone rang once. Marion. You settling in? She asked. I am, I said, looking out at the lake. It's smaller than the house, but it feels bigger somehow. That's how freedom works, she replied with a smile in her voice. Oh, and I thought you'd like to know. He's officially under investigation. Fraud, digital impersonation, and filing a false police report. They seized his accounts this morning. For a long time I said nothing. Then, quietly, thank you, Marion, for everything. You don't owe me thanks, Joe. You just owed yourself peace. After we hung up, I opened one of the boxes and began unpacking. A few photographs, a stack of letters, the small wooden box that held Richard's ring and the letter I'd found. I placed it on the shelf by the window, beside a vase of fresh flowers I'd bought at the market yesterday. The apartment was simple. One bedroom, a modest kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking the water. But it felt like it belonged to someone new, not the woman who had been doubted, manipulated, and tested. The woman who had survived it without raising her voice. By noon, Annie knocked on the door. She stood there holding a pie tin, her cheeks pink from the cold. I figured your first day here needed something sweet, she said. Apple? I asked, smiling. Always. She came in, and we sat at the tiny dining table, eating straight from the pan with 2 forks, laughing between bites. It felt light, easy, human. You did it, Joe, Annie said, wiping a crumb from her sleeve. You really did it. I didn't think it would feel this quiet, I said. That's how you know it's right. We talked for hours about small things, ordinary things, the kind of conversation that fills the air without demanding space. When she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You remind me that it's never too late to start over." After she was gone, I stood by the window again. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon sun, the water moving in soft ripples that seemed to echo my own breathing. I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Sometimes, freedom doesn't announce itself. It just sits quietly beside you, sipping coffee, waiting for you to notice. I closed the book and looked out once more, the light catching on the rim of my mug, the faint sound of wind against the glass. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not approval, not apology, not permission. The day ended in golden stillness, and when I turned off the lights, I whispered into the fading glow, "This is home now." It was late afternoon when the knock came, soft, hesitant, almost musical against the quiet of my new apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone. I set down my cup of tea and walked to the door, already knowing, somehow, who it was. When I opened it, Laura stood there, her eyes rimmed red, a picture frame pressed tightly against her chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The lake wind brushed past her shoulder, carrying in the faint scent of pine and rain. "Hi, Mom," she said finally. Her voice was small, the kind she used to have when she was little and afraid she'd done something wrong. "Hi, Laura." She looked down, then held up the frame. Inside was an old photo, Richard, smiling in the vineyard years ago, his arm around both of us. The glass was cracked diagonally across his face. "I found this in the box Ethan left behind," she said softly. "I thought maybe you'd want it." I took it carefully, tracing the crack with my thumb. "Thank you." She lingered in the doorway, uncertain. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She stepped inside, her eyes moving over the small space, the books, the lake view, the wooden box on the shelf. "It's nice here," she said. "Peaceful." "It is." I poured her a cup of tea without asking if she wanted one. Some things between mothers and daughters don't require questions. For a while, we just sat there, the steam rising between us like a bridge. Then she spoke again. "I don't know where to start," she said. "I've been replaying everything. What I said, what I didn't say, how I let him convince me that what we were doing was for you." I let her words settle. "Why did you believe him?" She looked down, twisting her ring. "Because it was easier than admitting I was scared. Scared of losing him. Scared of choosing sides. I told myself I was keeping peace, but really I was keeping distance." I nodded slowly. "That kind of peace costs too much." Tears filled her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't see what he was doing until it was too late." Her voice broke, and for a moment I saw not the woman she'd become, but the child she'd been. Tender, unsure, looking for forgiveness before the words could even form. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Laura," I said gently, "you don't have to explain everything. You just have to remember who you are. You got lost for a while, but you found your way back. That's what matters." She pressed her hand to her mouth, crying quietly. "You should hate me." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. Hate is too heavy for a life I just got back." She smiled through her tears. "You really don't change, do you?" "Oh, I've changed," I said. "I just stopped apologizing for it." We sat together for a long time, watching the light fade over the lake. The water glowed gold, then turned silver, then darkened to ink. The silence between us was no longer strained. It was gentle, alive. When she stood to leave, I walked her to the door. She hesitated, then looked at me with trembling hands. "Will you ever let me visit again?" I smiled softly and reached into my pocket. From it, I pulled out one of the old keys, the very one Ethan had tried in the door weeks ago. I placed it in her palm. "This doesn't open anything anymore," I said, "but maybe it reminds us both what should never be locked again." She stared at it, then closed her fingers around the key like it was something precious. "Thank you," she whispered. When she hugged me, I held her tightly, not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition, that this was the beginning of something better, quieter, truer. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her car disappear down the narrow road, the reflection of its taillights fading into the dusk. For the first time, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like clearing space for peace to stay. I turned off the lamp, the lake now a mirror of stars, and said softly into the silence, "Some doors close because they must. Others you open when you're ready." The next morning was quiet and pale, the kind of dawn that arrives softly without needing to be noticed. I woke early, long before the sun fully climbed over the lake. The air coming through the half-open window was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and water. It reminded me of mornings from decades ago, those slow, steady beginnings when Richard and I would sit on the porch with our coffee, watching light find its way through the trees. I made a small pot of tea, wrapped a scarf around my shoulders, and stepped outside. The path to the lake was lined with frost-tipped grass that crunched gently under my shoes. The world was utterly still, except for the quiet lap of water against the dock. In my coat pocket, the old keys jingled softly. I ran my thumb over the smooth brass of the largest one, the one that used to open the front door of the house. The metal was cold, heavy with history. At the edge of the dock, I stood for a moment, letting the stillness hold me. The lake stretched out before me like glass, pale blue and endless. A thin mist hovered just above the surface, drifting lazily as if reluctant to leave. I thought about everything that had brought me here. The betrayals, the silence, the calm defiance that had carried me through. None of it felt angry anymore. It just was. The kind of truth you stop trying to shape and simply accept. I closed my hand around the keys and whispered, "You've done your part." Then I tossed them gently into the water. They arced through the air, caught a flash of sunlight, and disappeared beneath the surface with a small splash. Barely a sound, but enough to mark the end of something enormous. Ripples spread outward, widening and fading until the lake returned to stillness. I stood there for a long time, listening to that silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. Pulling my notebook from my coat pocket, I flipped to a blank page and wrote in neat, deliberate handwriting, "Day 1 of a new beginning." I paused, then added a second line beneath it. "Freedom is quieter than I expected." The words sat on the page like a breath exhaled after years of holding it in. I closed the notebook, pressing it gently to my chest before slipping it back into my pocket. The sky brightened as I turned toward home. The frost began to melt under the soft touch of sunlight, and the path behind me glistened faintly with dew. When I reached the top of the hill, I looked back once more. The lake shimmered like a mirror, calm and endless, carrying the faintest ripple where the keys had vanished. Somewhere beneath that water rested everything I'd once been tied to, and everything I'd finally let go of. I smiled to myself, a quiet, certain smile. Life had circled back, not as it was before, but as it was meant to be. My own, unclaimed and peaceful. I walked home slowly, the day unfolding ahead of me like an open door.